Hi everybody, welcome back to Geezer Rider, and this is part one of a multi-part series on group riding. In this first installment, we're going to go over the definition of group riding, why you would want to group ride, who do you do it with, or who do you want to do it with, how do you find a group, what should you be looking for in a group, and what should you watch out for in a group, and questions you want to get answered from the group or the group leader. And additionally, your responsibilities within the group. And that'll be the focus and the limitation of this first part. In the subsequent parts, we will get into the mechanics of group riding. So let's go ahead and dive right in. What is the definition of group riding? Group riding is two or more bikes traveling together. That's you and one other bike as a minimum. Doesn't sound like that's a group, but the reason I use that definition is a lot of the communications and protocols and riding positions and such, and some of the things you need to look out for are the same whether you're riding with 20 other riders or just one other rider. And why would you want to ride in a group or more than one person? So let's say you've got your bike and you've been riding solo for years and you just want to go further, for example. There's safety in numbers. You can carry more gear if there's more than one of you, because there are certain things that can be used between two people as opposed to each person having to carry the same thing individually. And you just might want the company or the camaraderie. So, maybe you always had a riding partner and he or she no longer rides or moved away or sold the bike or can't ride due to health or family considerations, whatever the case may be. But you are thinking that there's enjoyment to be had, and you wouldn't be wrong in most cases of riding with one other person or a group of people. And who do you want to go riding with? And this is a big, sticky question. So the first thought is, I want to go and ride with like-minded people. Well, if I go ride with somebody who's a mirror image of myself, that can be fun for a day, but is going to get pretty boring after a while. What are we going to talk about if we agree on everything? We've had all the same experiences and stuff. So I would say that you're looking for some diversity. You're looking for people of different backgrounds. You're looking for people that have ridden different bikes. You're going to have a lot more to talk about for a longer period of time. That's just my opinion on it. There's a lot of videos out on this subject, and obviously this is just our take on it. The other thing you want to do is align yourself with people that feel generally the same way about riding as you do. So if you are a short haul rider, let's say that the longest trip you've ever taken was 50 miles. You don't want to align yourself with a group that regularly goes out on 500-mile runs. You're probably going to be miserable if you just make that big leap in mileage all at once. You're probably going to want to align yourself with people that have either a variety of ride lengths. They have your 50 miles and then maybe they have a 75 mile. You can slowly, work your way up in mileage. The other thing is, do they predominantly go on highways and freeways, or are they more back roads type rides for the majority of the riding? And think about the kind of bike you have and the skill sets that you have, and what kind of group riding would you align with. So for example, if everybody in the group has 1000 cc or 100 cubic inch or above motorcycles, and you happen to be on a 250 cc or 300 cc four-stroke right now, you may, and this is a generalization, but you may have difficulty keeping up with the group if they're on the freeway, for example, or the highway. Some areas of the country and the speed limits are like 70 miles an hour. Could you do it? Yes, but you're probably going to be playing catch up, or running towards the edge of the abilities of the bike, and that's not something you want to do. You want to be honing your skills and pushing yourself a little bit, but you don't want to be stressing your bike or your abilities. So you're going to want to match up with generally people that put together a ride that is either conducive to all types of riding, or they're all basically the same capability of bike as you. Also, skill set, I mentioned a little while ago. Are these rides set up for beginner, intermediate, or advanced motorcyclists? And be honest with your skills, and be honest, what they're saying. If they're telling you, yeah, we take everybody and it's cool, and we'll make sure that you have a good time, and you look at the technical complexity of the rides or the speed of the rides, and that doesn't seem to match what they're telling you, you might want to shop around for another group. You're also going to want to make sure that your values align. If it's a group that honors the posted speed limit to the degree that they really don't go any faster than the prevailing traffic, they try and stay in the speed limit, and that's your thing, you want to be safe, find that out up front, and we'll double back on this a little bit later in the talk. And also, do they obey traffic laws? So if these guys get up to a stale yellow light, are they all gunning it and try and make it through at the risk of being up on a camera, getting that envelope in the mail from your motor vehicle department of the state? Or, are they looking towards honoring the traffic laws and being as safe as possible? So try and figure out what their appetite for risk is, where their values are, and see how they align with yours. Because if that doesn't mesh, you're going to have a miserable time. And by that I mean either you're going to be miserable because they don't ride the way you ride, or they're going to be miserable because you don't ride the way they ride. The other thing is, how do I find a group? So oftentimes motorcycle dealerships will know of, or even have their own internal group, or they'll know of a group. They often aren't affiliated with the group, they just happen to know of them, and it's up to you to do your research on them and decide whether it's a fit for you or not. There's a lot of liability issues with group riding and such, so I see less and less dealerships, with some brand exceptions, not having an affiliated riding group these days. But they may know of one, and obviously the internet is probably your best bet. Just get a list together of groups that appear to be local, at the outset, appear to be aligned with the type of riding you're interested in, and then make the calls. And, we've already covered some of the questions you'd be asking, and we'll get to a couple of more. So that's how you might find a group. And also just ask around if you know anybody else that rides. It may not be something that had come up in discussion before. And even if they're not participating in the group, they may know of them, and it may be positive comments, it may be negative comments. So that's a good thing. Get that first or even secondhand information. And what you should be looking for in a group, like I said, do they have the same ability vehicles, the same ability motorcycles in the group? Are the rides set up for the same skill sets that you have? Are they going the places you want to go? You're looking into their values, and whether they're how they ride on the road, and like-minded to a degree. Like I said, I think you're going to be pretty bored if you're riding a group of 5 people just like you. It's going to be really cool for the first few rides, and then after a while you're going to slowly kind of run out of things to talk about besides the ride itself. So what should you watch out for in a group? I already said, people that misrepresent either, what you need in a motorcycle in order to ride. And by that, I mean, its capability, and their values on the road. So some of the things I look out for is, and this is my preference because these are some of the things that I do look for, or watch out for myself. So one is excessive speed. When you're pushing a group hard and you have more than a couple of bikes, your likelihood of something happening is increased, and your reaction time is diminished because of the increased speed. So if they're generally, 20 miles an hour above or more above the prevailing traffic, to me, that's a red flag. And my threshold is actually lower than that. And I would just caution you to see if you can't get an honest answer about that, and you'll figure it out in the first couple of rides where they're at. Is there a herd mentality? And I'll address this herd mentality again later, where hey, we're in a group, we're invincible, and we're going to own the left lane, and no cars are going to get in between us and everything. That's generally a recipe for a disaster, and that's definitely not a group that you want to learn group riding with. The other is kind of an ongoing PSA, and that is drinking and riding. And by that, I mean drinking alcohol and riding. If the destination is a bar, or the waypoints or a bar or an event with alcohol or whatever, I'm not saying you can't drink and then ride. What I'm saying is you can't, down a couple beers and then just hop on the bike and go. If you get to somewhere and you have a leisurely lunch and you guys hang out for a few hours after the beers and you allow that alcohol to work out of your system and then ride, that's a different story, as long as you're complying with local and state laws. If the group is pounding a bunch of beers and then riding, they're a danger to themselves, to you, and to other people on the road. And again, this is the things that I look out for. So, if the focus of a lot of the rides seems to be alcohol related, and that's not your comfort level, then you might want to look for another group. We talked about the skill limits. If they're constantly telling you this is an easy ride, they know you're a beginner and an intermediate rider, and they're telling you, oh yeah, just come along, you'll be fine, and you find yourself always trailing behind, or having to check up a lot at the last minute because they ride either very advanced or very aggressively, or they think they're advanced and they're constantly compensating for mistakes, you might want to find another group. And we already talked about your bike's limits. If they tell you, we're going to take it easy and we're going to be well within the range of your 4-stroke 250cc bike, and again, they're leaving you behind, they're pushing out 85 miles an hour, or trying to go on freeway stretches and stuff, and you just feel like you're always playing catch up, that's not a good mindset to be in a group ride, and you might want to find another group. So some questions that you want to get answered from the group, and this is probably from whoever. There's usually in a group ride, there's a ride leader, a ride captain, depending on the group, they'll have different nomenclature. There's should always be somebody at the very back of the group that's called the sweep or the sweeper, last man standing, whatever you want to call it, and their job is to keep an eye on the group. So the person in the very front sets the pace, should know where they're going, is looking in the rearview mirror to see how the group is doing, checking the body count, making sure that nobody's left behind. The person at the very tail end of the group makes sure that if the group gets separated, there's somebody there that knows the ride route and knows the protocol of the group and the hand signals and all that, so that the person that got separated, you stop for a red light, the rest of the group made it through, they don't start freaking out. And that's part of that herd mentality, like, oh, we must be all together at the same time. No, you don't. It's okay to be separated for a little bit, unless it's a very short ride. You're going to catch up together, and having a couple cars between you for a little while isn't the end of the world. So what do they do if someone's bike breaks down, for example? Are you on your own? Does somebody stay with you? How does that work? Most of the groups that I ride with are no man left behind. If somebody has an issue, we'll go with them to the dealership, and if we have to camp out for a couple hours until they get straightened away, we'll take care of it. If it's going to be more than that, a subset of the group will stay with the person having issues, and the rest of the group will either carry on, or we'll abandon the ride and go back to whatever waypoint we designated, or endpoint rather. What does the group do if somebody can't continue, either due to a health concern or perish forbid that they had an accident? Same questions as above. If somebody's bike breaks down, you want to know how people react like that. And there's people that are like, oh, your bike broke down, you just ruined my whole ride, I've been looking forward to this weeks. If that's the kind of attitude they're going to have, you might want to reconsider being part of that group. And we'll get to talk a little bit more about breakdowns and such under your responsibilities coming up here in a second. So you also want to ask them, what do they do in case of inclement weather? Is it a rain or shine ride? Are you capable of riding rain or shine? Do you have that experience? The time to figure out wet weather riding, if you've never ridden in the rain before, is not when you're in the middle of a group. That is putting yourself and everybody else in jeopardy. You want to learn those skills outside of a group situation. So be honest with yourself and be honest with the group. If they say they're going to ride through inclement weather, or they're going to begin a ride or end a ride, knowing that the forecast is calling for whatever might be in the forecast. Does the group have a fee or dues? And if so, what's included for that? So there's a couple of different types of group riding. There's a formal group, which regularly meets, and then every now and then you're going to find these what I call event runs. So it could be a charitable event, a fundraiser. I see them for breast cancer. There's escort rides for little kids battling illnesses. There's fundraisers for, I'll just call it like libraries or stuff, public service type things. There's memorials. One of the things that usually gets a lot of airtime is Toys for Tots, where bikers will get toys for kids and take them to a hospital, generally in late November, early December, something like that. So that would be an event ride, not always necessarily associated with a group, or it's multiple groups. So you would go on your own. So, is there a fee and what's included? So for the event ride, sometimes it includes a meal when you get to the destination, sometimes it doesn't. If the group has dues, what does that include, and where does the money go? Those are both interesting questions to get the answer to. We'll double back to that in a minute. And the last item that I have before my final thoughts there is your responsibilities. So what do you mean my responsibilities? You have responsibilities to yourself, to everybody else on the road, and especially in the group. And number one is make sure that your bike is in good running order. If you know your brakes are iffy, if you keep popping out of gear in your transmission for something, you've got, or you're losing power, the engine's cutting off intermittently. Until you get all that stuff sorted out, group riding is not the place to be trying to diagnose that, or pushing, trying to fit in a ride. Your bike should be in tip-top shape and everything already gone over before you go on a group ride. And this is something that you should be looking into regardless of brand or style of bike or whatever group you're riding in. And again, even if that's just one other person, this prevents breakdowns, it prevents accidents, it prevents aggravation. It's up to you, and solely up to you, to make sure your head is in the right place before you go on a ride. If you have some big life event or trial or tribulation going on, and you can't compartmentalize that for the sake of the ride, and those thoughts are going to be creeping in while you're riding, or making you more aggressive, or making you too melancholy, or whatever the emotional space might be that you put you in, that's not conducive to riding. It's up to you to decide, I shouldn't be riding today. And that's really a thought for every day. But again, in group riding, it's even that much more important, because you have responsibilities to the people in your group and around you and the other drivers on the road. Are you healthy enough to ride? So this goes along with your head being in the right place. You know, do you have a sprained ankle that's going to prevent you from braking or shifting, you know, or a sprained wrist or something like that? Do you have back pain or whatever, you know, anything that's going to detract from the point that it's going to affect your ability to go on the ride for the duration of the ride, or react to any situation in a timely fashion. You know, you're going to have normal, you know, good reaction time. If for some reason you had to pick up your bike, are you going to be able to do that? You know, don't go into it thinking that you're going to be able to rely on somebody else to help you with those things, because that might not always be the case for whatever reason. The other thing is, only you know your body, and this goes back to your physical health. So this is being recorded in the summer months right now, heat wave, and it's up to you to stay hydrated, to make sure that you have, you know, water on the bike, and to make sure that you're fed so that you don't get lightheaded. There are a number of groups that will push through the lunch hour, you know, and not stop until 1:30, 2 o'clock for lunch, either because they're trying to get through an area to avoid traffic congestion, or they're trying to outrun a weather system, or they're just trying to pound out a bunch of miles. Make sure that you get something healthy to drink and something healthy to eat, to keep yourself in tip-top shape. We've added some graphics, probably too far in the background for you to get a good idea of what's on there. You can freeze this and expand the view and take a look, or just go out to bikebandit.com. Good source of information. A lot of people have information on group riding, and I'm giving you my take on it. But you can refer to these graphics. So the first up is the hand signals. Generally are left arm up, perpendicular is going to be, we're making a right turn. This is a left turn. This is going to be stop. Putting your hand down to the side is either pointing an obstruction in the road or an indication to slow down. This is all discussion you should have with your ride leader and your sweeper, the person in the very back of the ride, before you start off, and make sure everybody has an understanding. So let's just decide for a moment. We'll assume that you have decided that you want to go on a group ride, and you're assembling at 8 o'clock in the morning at some area where you're mustering or getting together for the ride, and there's 15 people, you know, considerable size group. Not too large, obviously not too small. There's bound to be a variety of skill sets there. You are now out of line asking if there's anybody that's never ridden in a group before, or if they've ridden in that group before. And if you yourself haven't ridden in that group before, you need to call that out, because they may have some assumptions about hand signals they use. Either they're different, or they have a different interpretation for their group of common hand signals. And this is very important for reasons we'll get into in a moment. So looking at the formation, basically what you have in any group ride is a staggered formation. There is somebody at the front of the group, which is the ride leader or whatever you want to call them, and they are either centered in the lane or offset in the lane. Either they're favoring the center line of the lane, or they're favoring the outside of the lane. You need to know what they're going to do as a general rule of thumb, because everybody else's position is keyed off of that. So if the ride leader is assuming the left lane position, then the next person behind them should assume the right lane position. This gives you distance between the bikes. What you're doing is you're offsetting their rear wheel from your front wheel and putting at least a bike or two lengths worth of distance between you. So if you have to check up, meaning brake quickly, you're increasing your stopping distance, but you're maintaining a presence in the lane as though there was a four-wheeled vehicle there to discourage other cars from moving in and out of your group. And why do I bring that up? Why do you want to discourage other, four-wheel vehicles going in and out of your group? Are you, establishing dominancy? No, it's a safety precaution primarily for most groups. Other groups have different agendas, but for the purpose of this discussion, it's a safety discussion. So what you don't want to do is encourage somebody to try and, nose their way into your group for whatever reason. They can either accelerate beyond your group if it's practical for them, or they can let off the gas and get behind your group. Obviously, that's impractical if you're a group of bikes that's 100 plus and there's some poor person trying to get off on an exit, go into a hospital or something. Let them do what they need to do. It's not the end of the world. If your group has communicated ahead of time, you've shared your ride plan, you all know where you're going, your leader and your sweeper are looking out for everybody. If a car needs to momentarily, or truck or whatever, needs to momentarily get in the middle of your group for non-aggressive reasons to get somewhere, the hospital is an example, please allow them to do that. Promote motorcycling in a positive aspect. But in general, what you don't want to do is make it look like, oh, this is a disparate group of bikes on a ride, and you get segmented. So basically, imagine a centipede is a bunch of multiple segments, and all of a sudden you have all these cars in between. You lose your ability to maintain proper spacing. And why would that be important? Why wouldn't you just go ahead with traffic and allow everybody in there? And the reason is, the majority of four-wheeled vehicle operators have no idea about the acceleration or braking capabilities of a motorcycle. So they will either tailgate you too closely, cut you short, do a variety of unsavory things because they're uneducated about the performance characteristics of a motorcycle. The people on the motorcycle should be aware of that and should maintain a spacing such that if the first rider has to brake quickly, the second rider is offset, and as they start to overtake the other rider, they're clear of that back wheel and can let off and maintain the ride without hitting the back of the other motorcycle. So people that have been on group rides or ridden with even one other person, where you don't ride side by side, I don't recommend that under any circumstances, unless you're a, parade rider, like police or performance rider of some kind. But in general, if you're out on a ride, you should be in a staggered formation. You can check up at a red light or a stop sign side by side to get everybody together. We'll get to that probably in the third segment on this video series. But for right now, what you want to know is that your most experienced riders are probably not where you would imagine they would normally be. You would probably think, oh, they'll all be up at the front of the pack because they know what they're doing and they know where they're going. The reality is the less experienced riders are able to accomplish less with the reaction time given to them, and they're slower to pick up on visual cues of what's happening than a more experienced rider. So what we call that is the rubber band effect, and you'll see that referred to in Department of Highway, studies and such, where something happens in the front and that all stretches out to the back, it gets corrected, and then everything contracts again. What we have is the rider in the front says, hey, we're all coming to a stop, maybe throws up the single file as a first order of business, like it's a construction zone. Hey, everybody get single file. Let's maintain our spacing and go, one by one. And for whatever reason, he has to brake hard. The person behind that alleged most experienced rider needs to be able to react to that, interpret that, and provide a hand signal or some other visual clue beyond just their brake lights to the rest of the pack, because as that translates back, everybody else has less time to react to it. So It could be a full second before the first person in the line has seen the deer about to cross the road, before the fifth bike in the pack is able to even appreciate the fact that something's happening, let alone react to it and get the bike to respond and do what it needs to do. So first of all, you're offset from one of each another, whichever direction it is. And you have your least experienced riders, all the way in the rear or all the way in the front. The problem with having the least experienced riders all the way in the front is if there's an emergency situation, like I said with the deer, they're less likely to pick up on it right away because compared to an experienced rider, and they're less likely to correctly respond quickly like an experienced rider would. So you probably want them in the back. You want to feed them the information as quickly as possible and give them time to respond. And your sweeper will be there observing everybody, the sweeper being the person in the back of the pack. And when you stop for gas or a rest stop or for lunch or breakfast or whatever it may be, they may make suggestions like, hey, let's change the order. And no matter what the circumstances are, don't let your pride get in the way. If you are in front of or behind somebody that's making you uncomfortable that you're riding with, talk to somebody and get your position changed in the line. There is actually a pretty relaxing factor to being all the way in the back of the pack. You're always reacting to everything everybody else does, but you can space yourself out so that you have time, that you're not always scrunching up against everybody and having a bit more of a relaxing ride. If you get behind somebody that can't maintain a constant speed, or if you are in front of somebody that can't maintain the stagger and is constantly coming up alongside you because they don't notice that the person in front of you has thrown up a hand signal or put on their brake or their directional, or whatever the case is, they're compromising your safety percentages. So either get further ahead in the pack away from them or further back in the pack away from them. And the people in the group should feel comfortable talking to that person and saying, hey, what's going on? You apparently have a different style riding. It doesn't have to be, this big confrontation. It can just be, you apparently ride a little differently in a group than we do. What's been your experience, and we'll work it out. And hopefully if it's a decent group of riders, male, female, and different, I've covered all that in a different video. It shouldn't matter who you're riding with. You should be able to have a conversation about it. It should all be civil and you should be able to work it out. So know the hand signals ahead of time. Know the route where you're going ahead of time. Be prepared that something may happen. You have a well-prepared route. The ride leader checked Waze or Google Maps or whatever before you left, and there's an accident, that happened at or just after the time you took off, and the route has to change. You have to be ready to adapt to that. And if these are things that are going to make you anxious and nervous and unable to participate in the group ride, you should wait until your skills come up to that level before you join in a group ride. And should something like that happen, you're putting everybody else's safety in jeopardy if you're not in a position where you can kind of brush that off and just work with the changes, go with the flow in a safe manner and continue on. If you're, going to be all out of sorts because I know we should have turned right there, but he's gone up to the next exit or what have you, that's going to be a problem for you because your head's really not going to be in the game. You're going to be thinking too much about directions and not enough about the ride and the having your head in the game on the ride, as it were. So think about your personal perspective. I would recommend when you start to ride in a group, keep it to 5 or less the very first time you do it, and get used to the hand signals, get used to the cadence, get used to the rubber band effect, and get used to, are these people that generally ride a couple miles an hour under the speed limit? I've been, in this day and age, it's hard to imagine, but I've been in group rides where people, they go a couple miles an hour under the speed limit, either because they're on a bike that indicates a couple miles an hour slower than what they're going, or they're just trying to slow everything down for everybody. Conversely, and you're overtaken a lot, then people are getting agitated. The other thing is if you're going over the speed limit or over the prevailing speed of traffic, that can also put an inexperienced rider in jeopardy. And or if you're someone who doesn't like that, that's going to be an irritant on your mind, taking your head a little bit out of the game while you're riding. So, you should have that conversation before you leave on the trip. And if you find the experience is something different while you're on the ride, you should feel free to talk to the ride leader or somebody else, whoever invited you on the ride. There's some organizer, and just say, hey, it looks like we're doing about 10 miles an hour over posted all the time. Is that deliberate? What are we trying to do here? And again, that should be a civil conversation. If you expect it to be a civil conversation and you experience an exchange that's other than that, then maybe you should think about who it is you want to ride with. You should ride with fairly like-minded people from a safety perspective, and not compromise your safety or your values. The cop doesn't care if 20 riders are going 20 miles an hour over or 2 riders are going 20 miles an hour over. He's still writing you a ticket. So what I refer to that is the herd mentality. Some people call it the hive mentality. Oh, I'm part of this group. We're all rolling through this stop sign together, and there's, a police officer nestled off in the woods to the side. He doesn't give a flying fig Newton what group you're part of. You're blowing through a stop sign where there's, no continue, it's stop then turn, not just, a rolling stop. And they can cite you for it. So these are all things you need to consider and discuss before you even begin the ride. And if you experience them and they make you uncomfortable on the ride, ask about it. And if they just say, well, that's the way we ride, you either adopt and adapt, or you say, you know what, this group isn't for me. I'll find another one that's more tuned to my skill set and my liking. And it is not a condemnation of your skill set if you don't want to do 10, 20, 30 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't do that, and just don't do that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And if somebody's going to take issue with that, that's on them. They can be silly about it if they want to, but you know what you do and don't want to do, and you know where you are and are not comfortable. So think about that. There's a lot to unpack here in a very short period of time. I'm trying to lower the duration of some of these videos, and I apologize the graphics aren't any larger. We'll see if we can do something about that in the future. But like I say, you can put this on pause and stretch the frame out or whatever if you want, or just Google. This happens to be bikebandit.com. Lots of good information on there. I generally align with what they have to say. You can leave me a comment if you have a specific question about something, but just know what happens if we get half of the group. We got 15 riders and we get 7 guys through, and a yellow light and a light turns red. Is the expectation that everybody else is going to blow through the red light, or is the expectation that the other 7 guys are going to stop, wait out the red light, and the 7 guys that went through are either going to take it really easy and go the exact speed limit, or maybe even pull over and then go? Or is it that they're going to keep going and we'll catch up to them? So let's get into briefly, just a little bit of the mechanics of what happens. So let's say you come to just something very simple, a red light or a stop sign. So you've all been staggered and you're maintaining position, all the way back through the pack, and you come to the red light or the stop sign. What I would suggest you do is you come up and almost get to the back tire of the bike in front of you. So they're over here on this side of the lane, you're over here on this side of the lane. This is your front tire, this is their back tire, and you don't overlap. And the reason for this is if they start to go and they get wobbly, or they have to hit the brakes real quick, if they stop and topple over, they're not going to hit your tire and topple over. You won't have this domino effect back through the pack. So you're all bunched up together now, a lot tighter than you were before you started. So the minute the first guy starts rolling, you don't want to just dump the clutch and grab a handful of throttle. You want to let them pull out a little bit. What's going to happen is, in general, the leader is going to take off at a pretty brisk pace. Some might call a jackrabbit start. And the reason for this is, especially at a red light, he's trying to allow enough time for the back of the pack, way back here, to get through that light before it turns yellow again. So what does that mean? That means by the time the last guy releases his front brake, releases the clutch, and starts rolling, he's got a finite, or she has a finite amount of time to get rolling and get all the way through the light. So they're going to get up to the speed limit quite quickly, the person in the back, because there's going to be, everybody has moved through, and it's going to look like they're hauling butt, on the other side of the light and the other side of the stop sign. The reality is, in general, they got up to the speed limit really quick and they got out there a little ways, but now they're just doing the speed limit. So let's say it's a 50-mile-an-hour road, and the first 7 or 8 bikes out of 15 have cleared the stop sign or the red light and are beyond it now, and they're doing 50-55 miles an hour, and they slow down. They're no longer accelerating. The person in the back might get up to like 60 miles an hour, making sure that they get through before that light turns yellow or yellow to red. What they now have to do is kind of check up a little bit. So this is where the skills of the ride leader come in. The ride leader, let's assume it was a stop sign and not a red light. That's a controllable situation. They should be looking for a pause in traffic, or break in traffic, where nobody's coming, long enough that everybody can get through without having to get up, above the speed limit, or not by much, to catch up to everybody. And this is that rubber band effect. You're stretching out the front end, and then the back end is trying to contract and catch up to everything. So what happens a lot of times is you have your less experienced riders in the back, and they're like, oh, I don't want to be left behind. I'm going to keep up with the group. And they're doing like 70 miles an hour by the time they've cleared that stop sign or that red light. And all of a sudden they see everybody else's taillights coming up quick, and they're having to brake check hard. So that's a skill that the entire group has to develop, and you as an individual is to manage that gap when you're trying to get through a stop sign or a red light or everything, but not overtake too quickly the next person in line that you're coming up to. You don't want to run into them. You don't want to be in a position where you're braking hard or whatever, because they could still have to adjust for a deer jumping out across the road, or roadkill, or fallen branch in the road, or gravel that spilled, whatever it may be. So that's one very specific example, some of the mechanics of group riding. And I can't go through every single thing, but what I wanted to do was, just bring this topic to light for everybody, and just give you some, again, here we go with the term homework, give you some homework to do, to look into, what do I need to know before I go group riding. And I don't know why there's a lot of hesitancy for people to, in a group setting, say, hey, what's your protocols? What do you do? What do you do? In general, somebody will answer you. And if they're being deliberately vague, chances are they're up to something that you don't want to do. They either drive too fast, or they roll through stop signs, or they blow red lights. And there's more cameras at intersections now than there aren't. So my advice to you is think twice before blowing through a red light, because if you're going into a stale yellow that you're pretty damn sure that's about to turn red, or if it's already red, chances are, whether you see a flash of light or not, you're probably captured by a camera. So I hope you found this information helpful. I'll try and give some thought to some additional items that we could add to our group riding series, and get back to you with the third part if that's warranted. Thanks. Drive safe. Namaste.